Good morning and welcome to the David and David on Real Estate podcast. We are today on episode number 184. David Korman, welcome back. So good to be co-hosting with you.
Always good to do another podcast with you. We always find something interesting. There's always something going on that you don't anticipate. And today's topic, I think, clearly falls into that category. There's a lot of stuff that we know what happens regularly in the industry, and we should discuss this in a podcast. Every once in a while, something comes out of left field, and it was like, really? Did that really happen? And I think this is one of those issues. So maybe you could lead it off because my head's still shaking with this decision that came out of BC.
Yeah, so was this a lower court, David, or was this a higher court that issued this decision?
No, I think it's a lower court, so maybe it'll make its way through. But it was in British Columbia, there was this ruling on Aboriginal title rights, that basically said, we believe that title to this whole big chunk of land it still has an interest. The Aboriginals still have an interest in this, even though there's been a whole bunch of owners over the years that have been living through the process of BC, and some judge there says, no, we still think that the Aboriginals still have a claim to this property because it was never divested from them properly.
It's a big shocking to me because our whole system is based on certain rules and procedures that instill confidence, right? And if you can go back and shake the tree and shake that confidence in our current system, where does it stop?
Right. Right. And I don't think either of us are saying that Indigenous people, didn't have a claim at some point, didn't have a history, weren't there for, but, whether it's here, you look at any piece of land anywhere in the world, at some point in time, it was occupied by other people, other
Right,
nations,
of
other
course.
whatever. And stuff, history happens, things change. And no different than here. So it's one thing to say, to do something like where we're recognizing, like you go to a Toronto Maple Leafs game, and before the game starts, they're making an announcement. They recognize that this land where the stadium once was once Indigenous lands, and and there's one thing to recognize that, because of course it was. Every piece of land everywhere in the world was at one point in time owned by somebody else. It's one thing to just acknowledge that and recognize it. It's a different thing to say, we're not sure, but they might still have a claim on that. They might still have an ownership interest in that, even though there's a government came in, the government of Canada came in, and they created a nation called Canada, and there's new rules, new laws, new regulations over the land and how people use it and how we buy and sell land to each other. And at some point, like, when do prior owners lose their ownership interests in it? Like, can every piece of land say, well, this is, David Gorski just bought this house, but we have to acknowledge and forevermore that the prior owner was Joe Smith, and prior to that, it was John Doe, and maybe they still have some interest in it, even though they transferred their ownership for valuable consideration to David Gorski. Like, at some point, Canada acquired those lands, and it became part of the Canadian, land system. And in BC, they have their registry office system and land title system and whatever they have, like we do in Ontario, and every province does. And title gets transferred through a legal process. And here a judge is saying, well, yeah, there's all that legal process, but maybe they still own an interest in this land. So,
Well, well, David, that's the opinion of one person, right? It would be really what's the word I'm looking for? Not interesting, but it really counterproductive for one person to abolish a whole system that has worked really well. And if this is upheld through the higher courts, I mean, the ramifications might be quite severe here. It's certainly something that we're going to be following and paying attention to.
Yeah, so if that ruling is correct, there's a major problem in
Major
the
problem.
industry. And if it's happening in, what's to say it's not going to happen in the other provinces too? Because at some point, whether it was a fair deal or not a fair deal in hindsight, but a deal was made,
Yeah, but
to
David, we talk about
acquire.
consideration all the time. Like I remember our first podcast episode, we talked about consideration, and the amount of consideration is never in question. It's whether it was given
Right.
that, the law looks at.
And,
Like the
and,
law doesn't look whether
and
consideration is
accepted and
fair.
accepted,
Right, whether it was
right?
given and accepted, and if it was, then that is consideration. That we see this in contracts all the time for the consideration of $1. As long as there's an exchange and it's accepted, that's all you need for a binding contract.
Right. It's not like you can open up, well, yeah, they made a deal, but I think Gorski, got a really good deal on buying that last house.
Right.
So some other authority should say, you know what, maybe, it wasn't a fair transaction and that seller should be entitled to more, or the seller still has an interest in that house that David Gorski just bought from because Gorski got the better end of the deal. Like that's not the law. It's never been the law. You can't operate that way. You can't have an underlying claim still because something may not have been a fair transaction at some point in time, you know, in
So
hindsight.
this is all coming back, David. The reason I wanted to discuss this today, because this is all coming back to instilling confidence in the asset class of real estate. Again, it's like it's another kink in the armor. It's like, we talked about a couple episodes ago about the iPro and the regulator scandal and criminal charges. We're talking about, we talked about education as well on these podcasts. And now, there's another kink in the armor where now there's a ruling that says that, all this land and all these transactions could be subject to indigenous rights, and they're our whole system of how we transfer properties and how we assign property rights might be at issue here. And it's just it's really, again, it's really unfortunate because as somebody who loves this industry, I want to see consumer confidence go up. I want consumers to be confident that, real estate is the best investment, is the best way of building wealth, is the best hedge against inflation, is the best asset class out there. And when I see articles like this and decisions like this, it just chips away at the armor, at the system, at the confidence that consumers have when it comes to real estate. And I don't like it. And I look at title insurance and some of the other systems that we have in place to safeguard consumers. And my question was, when I read this article, like, are we going to see some adjustments to title insurance? Like, my question for you, David Korman, is, if let's say somebody buys a large parcel of land and pays fair market value title transfers, and then there's some indigenous claim to it years later, would title insurance cover the buyer for something like that?
It shouldn't even come down to title insurance
Right, I agree.
because we have a system here, like under our constitution, regulating real estate is given to the provinces. So each province creates their own system. And our system in Ontario is very similar to the British Columbia system. They create a registry office. And that's whose job it is to control all the land in the province and figure out who's got title to it. And under the original registry system, like we have in Ontario, if someone was buying a property, under our laws in Ontario, we only had to search title back 40 years. That's where we find the good root of title. If something got screwed up on title more than 40 years ago, before our transaction, we don't have to worry about it. We just have to go back and see what's happened over the last 40 years going forward to make sure that title was always consistent, and we clean up any issues over the last 40 years. And then our system converted to a land title system where the government takes another step And they go through piece by piece of every piece of real estate in the province, and they transfer it out of the registry system into the land title system. In order to do that, they're checking the history of that title, and they're basically certifying to the public that this piece of land is now in the land title system because we've checked everything behind the system, all the history and everything is fine. And we're certifying that there's good ownership. And that's what the consumers rely on. Okay, we rely on the registry and land titles offices. They're certifying that there is good and valid legal title to it. So we're just going back there. We don't have to go back 400 years, to look. We don't have to go back 200 years. We don't have to, never had to go back more than 40 years to see what the history is. And maybe 41 years ago, someone made a mistake on a transfer or didn't get paid something. Too bad. You have to draw a line in the sand at some point in a civilized society and say, this is how we govern. And these are the laws, and that's the way it is. So it shouldn't even come down to a title insurance thing, because for the most part, there is protection just the way the land title system works. Okay. But then on top of that, there could be some title insurance coverage for certain things too. But they're basically, you're not getting title insurance protection in case the government made a mistake
Right.
in doing something. Okay, if the government made a mistake, those things will get cleaned up. When you point out mistakes, they'll correct it in the system. And there would be some coverage for certain things that through title insurance to protect the owner and make sure the owner's not incurring costs while the system is corrected. Okay, so it does, there is a lot of consumer protection for all that. But this comes out of left field, like, well, forget about all that. Maybe maybe there was a historical claim that goes back like centuries. Like, well, how do we deal with that? How do we give people comfort and certainty in the real estate market if you're opening up that potential can of worms?
Yeah, I mean, it's a one-way streak if you ask me, David. So, the if this decision's upheld, I foresee other lawsuits across Canada from Indigenous communities, and it's really going to shake the foundation of our system. So I hope it doesn't go there. I hope that the higher courts overrule this decision, and I hope that it stops there.
Yeah, I hope so too. And not that anybody wants anything to be taken away from people that had rights. Hopefully they did receive fair consideration at some point in time, and there was a due. But at some point in time, you have to draw that line in the sand and say, okay, from this point forward, we're moving. We have a government here, we have a system, and it's got to be fair for all the people that are living here, and there has to be some certainty. And so, anyway, we'll see how they
Yeah.
resolve this.
Yeah, we're going to continue monitoring and bring you guys updates. And this is why we do these podcasts, David Korman, so we can bring these issues to light, discuss them, and I think this is a great discussion. And I think as a professional, you have to be aware of certain things, right? And David, is your office, in light of this ruling, are you guys taking any steps to vet properties in any sort of different way? I know the article
No,
suggested
no,
that no, you guys, okay.
no. No, I think we follow the laws of the province of Ontario. We do our title searches the way we do them. We rely on the information that's in the registry offices and that's available to us. So I don't think this changes anything right now. I don't think it will. Um, so I think we give people, we do our searches in the normal course. We fix title if there's an issue that comes up when we do a search, and when we close, people get good marketable title and good and insurable title if there's title insurance to their property, and they can rely on that, and their lenders rely on that, and that's how the civilized society has to move forward. And
Yeah.
so that's the way we operate. I don't think this is really going to change anything.
Awesome. Well, David, if you're listening, send us your questions and concerns. I know I have I have concerns, and I think a lot of people listening would also share those concerns as well. So we want to hear from you guys. Send us an email. And thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys and catch you guys on the next episode of the David and David on Real Estate podcast. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.